authority, idolatry, binaries, obedience and the circle of blessing, the rod and discipline, children as mini adults, total depravity, and performance reviews. These are thematic vocabulary words I chose. These are terms I chose to encapsulate the themes you see in Ted Tripp's Shepherding a Child's Heart. So for those of you who don't want to do an extensive chapter by chapter deep dive, these are the themes, and I'm going to touch on each of them really quickly. Ted says multiple times that parents are agents of God's authority. They act in God's stead. When a child defies a parent, they are defying God. So parents are given unlimited authority, besides a few disclaimers that are subjectively measured as far as don't act in ungodly ways. Parents are given unlimited authority in the lives of their children. This leads to everything else, because Ted is going to say, because you've been tasked with this authority from God, you need to do X, Y, and Z. He references Genesis 18 to attempt to establish this, which is a quote of Abraham being chosen by God. So there really is a sense that parents can feel chosen and guaranteed outcomes if they operate as God's agents. Idolatry is another thing that shows up all throughout this book. And Ted's worldview is one that the human heart is either worshiping idols or worshiping God. He points vaguely to Romans 1 for this, but this is a nouthetic counseling worldview where every problem is a result of sin issue and can be related to idolatry. And so to deal with the problems, you need to root up the sin, do away with the idols, and turn to God, and you will have the results you want. So this really sets up a whole host of either or thinking. So choose your opposite. It can be either biblical or what the culture is saying. It can be, that will always be unbiblical. It can be idolatry or godly, but there's no in between. It wants parents to teach their children to understand and interpret their behavior through this lens so that they can evaluate their own heart motives. He claims on page 67, your child is a covenantal creature with an idolatrous heart. So there's no getting around this. And as we'll see, there's no winning for the child, because if they have undesirable behavior, it's because of their idolatrous heart. If they have desirable behavior, they're at risk of being a hypocrite. And that also is because of their idolatrous heart. Ted introduces the circle of blessing. It's a big circle, and he shows a child in it and saying basically it's a prosperity gospel promise that says if you step out of this circle, you are in a dangerous place. And the circle of blessing is parental authority. And so parents in their moments of discipline and communication should seek to bring their children back under their authority so they can be guaranteed a long and prosperous life. So he is unabashed about this direct prosperity gospel claim. And it's flip, that if you leave the circle of authority, bad things will happen to you. So pick your binary thinking here, either behaviorism or there's zero discipline, either determinism or denial of that, either culture or biblical way. Either you're parenting as an advisor or you're an authority figure. So there's all these either or, and of course the or you want is the one that Tripp is going to lay out. The way you get children to stay in the circle of blessing is through communication and then through discipline, which Tripp is going to lay out as God-mandated spanking, use of the rod. And he is very step-by-step about how this needs to look, and there's a specific procedure parents need to follow, and he's going to say very directly, parents must do this, and it must be painful. Children are constantly throughout the book basically presented as mini adults in little bodies. So the adult view, the nouthetic counseling view of an adult is transferred over to children. So for instance, in examples, if a child's having trouble sitting still at circle time, that is his craving for the approval of his peers. If a little girl is being too directive on recess time, that is her needing to comfort her heart through control of others. So everything gets passed through this spiritualized lens, coming from nouthetic counseling's understanding of how do you deal with adult problems, and then just transferred right over to children. I'm not really sure if Tripp believes in total depravity, but essentially that's what shows up in his writing. So there's a couple places where he tries to get at the theological nuances here, because he's said again and again that parents need to make disciplinary moments theological, that children need to be brought to the cross. And there's a lot of phrasing like that talking about sin and idolatry in the human heart, and then saying, look, having expectations that your children cannot achieve is a way of saying God's perfect law will convict their consciences of their sin. So your children will never be able to meet the expectations, but that's good news, because their failure will bring them to this moment of discipline. In the moment of discipline, you'll be able to tell them about your sin and the cross of Jesus and forgiveness. They will somehow receive forgiveness, and I'm guessing this is in a discussion or in a prayer of some kind. And then they will go on to try harder to meet those expectations. And do manage to perform, as in not misbehave, that will be because God empowered them to do that. So it's kind of like, no matter how you look at it, all their efforts are either sinful and idolatrous, or even when they are measured as adequate performance, that is because of God, not because of them. So I do think maybe if he was pressed on that, he would say, yes, total depravity all the way. Because he also says things like, oh, even for pre-verbal children, it's idolatry in their heart. Obviously before children can understand even what they're doing, he's naming them idolaters or rebellious. And then in the last part of the book, I named this performance review, because the first half of the book, he lays out all his ideas. You can check out the summary video I did on part 1 if you want. In the second part, he's looking at 3 different kind of arbitrarily set stages. So when the child still may be at home with parents, so 0 to school age, and then teenage years. And he's kind of tweaking a little bit to say, well, here's how the circle of blessing applies. Here's how you can weave in these theological ideas. And then he does close by saying you're entrusting your child to God's grace, but essentially God's grace operates through these means. So you as a parent need to work really hard to make this happen and trust that God's grace would see it through. But there's this one moment where he, in earnest, talking to a businessman friend who does quarterly performance reviews, and really encouraging parents to do regular performance reviews of their children and kind of in different categories evaluate their performance and then set goals accordingly within this circle of blessing and circle of danger framework. And I think the end effect of all of this is everyone's caught up in this really introspective, myopic, internal self-evaluation process that's very common in nouthetic counseling. It's going to show up on both levels of the family, because the children are being taught to kind of scrupulously examine their hearts. The parents are seeing everything through that lens, their children's behavior. And the meta arc of that is parents are striving to do these standards. And again, it's that same, you're trying really hard to meet something that you can't do. He does say you have to entrust your children to God. You can't guarantee that, but you still need to try really hard, because that's the means. And if it works out, that's God working through you. So that's kind of your justification that you did it right, and that it's God endorsed, is if it works out for you in this certain way. There's a lot that could be said about this book, and it's hard to know how to sum it all up, except to say this was presented to thousands of parents as a biblical way, and there is not a very clear biblical structure to that. Ted is not as clear about normalizing his own parenting experience. There are a few times when he pops in and talks about how that worked in his family, but presumably this is built on his own experience, plus applying nouthetic ideas to family life. And I've talked before how I'm not sure how many readers maybe were aware of that's what they were getting dished up, and they continue to be in this book in a number of ways. What it has at the end is just a catalog of Bible verses, and this to me feels like the classic approach of nouthetic counseling played out, where the Bible has been utilized a lot, but it's not very clear how or to what effect. Like, Bible verses show up to lend credibility to this. They're not expounded on. Often they're inserted parenthetically as justification of points Ted is writing about. But then this is going to be served up as the biblical way to parent.